I'm using SEO everywhere. So from my title, keywords in their descriptions, when I go to do an episode, I'm using SEO. So my podcast grew more from the podcast apps, from using SEO than what my audience was at that time.
Are you not getting the downloads you desire? Unsure about how to promote your podcast effectively? Or struggling to monetize your work? Well, you've just found the resource you need. Hi and welcome to Mics to Millions, the podcast that brings you exclusive, in-depth conversations with top-tier hosts in the health and wellness industry to help you grow your podcast. I'm your host, Sam Breakgear, co-founder of PodWritten, a podcast booking agency for health and wellness businesses. In every episode, we dive deep into what it really takes to get more podcast listeners, successfully promote your show, and monetize your work. Remember, if you like the show, please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. This helps us grow, and in doing so, we can continue to offer you valuable insights and podcast growth tips. Now, let's get into it. My guest today is the host of Healthy Beyond 40, a podcast that empowers women to take control of their health through simple life changes so they can feel good and live their best lives. The show receives roughly 15,000 monthly listeners, which is an impressive achievement given that the show only started in March 2023. She's also an online personal trainer and health coach, a mum of 4, a military spouse, and holds a doctorate in physical therapy. Michele Riechman, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me here.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. It's wonderful to have you here. I think that your case study really stands out because you're so new to the podcasting scene, but your show has come so far in such a short period of time. And I'd love to know, like, how did the idea for Healthy Beyond 40 first come from? Like, where did it first come from? And like, how did you know you wanted to create this?
Yeah, so I started my online business doing personal training and health coaching for women and really for moms. So it took a little while of really doing some journaling and some guidance on really who I wanted to focus on. So who I wanted to narrow down to. And that sort of became women over 40 because sometimes a lot of our hormones are changing and we're just in a really busy season of life where we're not taking care of our health. So I really wanted to focus on those people. And I had also dabbled in guest podcasting because I really do love teaching and empowering people to take care of their health. Because our health rules everything we do in our life, and there's so much out there in the diet culture that we are not taught well. So I love helping people get away from that diet culture and focus on healthy. So that's one reason why healthy is in my podcast title, because I really want those people who are looking to be healthy, not just losing weight, not looking for a diet, but people who are healthy. So also my podcast title is very SEO friendly. So it's Healthy Beyond 40. So if someone looks at that, if they're 40 or older or even close to 40, they are going to click on that because that is what they want. And I did have a business coach, she's sort of a friend too, help me with the name. I was thinking of something different and she's like, that's not going to click. I was thinking beyond perimenopause or perimenopause and beyond. And she's like, I don't think most people are going to know what that means. So me being more with a medical background, that makes sense to me. So it's also good to have feedback from other people to make sure that that was going to click with my audience.
A while now. And did you get a wide variety of feedback? Did you actively seek it out, or was it just like some close friends maybe you shared it with?
Yeah, it was more closer people, but I specifically like privately connected with people who I think would be in my ideal audience to run that by. So not just anybody, but people that I wanted to listen to my podcast and that I thought would.
That makes sense. Yeah. I think it's a great name. It's exactly very clear. And yeah, I can understand how that would be SEO friendly. So that's certainly a smart choice. And I know outside of podcasting, you're a mom of 4 and a military spouse, which must keep you pretty busy. Do you have any advice for those listening who maybe want to get started with a podcast but feel they just don't have enough time?
Yeah, I think our time is always what we make of it. So
Can
When
you
it
share
comes to
how you got
podcasting,
started
you
in yoga
can
and how
sort
it's
of keep
evolved to
it
where
pretty
you're at today?
simple. So for me to do
Absolutely.
one
So I
episode,
started
it probably
yoga
takes me 1 to
when
2
I was
hours.
young. Like
So if I
I couldn't
know
even
how much
drive. My
time
mom
that's
used
going
to
to
drive
take,
me to my
and
yoga
then
classes.
I keep my
And
editing
as
pretty
you know,
simple,
for a lot of
especially when
people,
I
I
do
was there
solo
like for a
episodes.
quote good
And this is one
stretch.
reason I do
I
more
was there because
solo
I heard it was
episodes
good
because it's
for
easier
the
to
training
edit.
that
So
I
I'm
was doing.
basically
And
editing as I
I
go
used to be
along.
a
So I'll
short swim
stop, I'll take
skipper.
a
I
pause.
moved
That way I'm
forms
not
now.
having to go
I'm
back and
laughing to
listen to the
myself because
whole
we were talking a little
episode.
bit about this
So I
before
keep
we
my
hit
editing
record. But
simple.
I
I
used to be
also
a
keep my
Shavasana skipper,
episodes
meaning I
short.
took
So
the
they're
class, and as
typically
soon as
10
we
to
rolled down
30
our mats
minutes.
and the instructor said,
And
okay,
I've gotten
lay
really good
down,
feedback about
it's time
that.
for
So
Shavasana, I
people
would just roll
will
up my mat and
message
I would
me and they're
leave
like,
because I
I just
thought,
love how
what a
short
waste
they
of
are,
time
how
to
to the
just lay
point they
there for a
are.
few minutes.
So I'm also
And
making sure that
it's
the
funny to me now,
episodes
if you would have
are
told my
meshing
like
with the
14
audience,
year old
and
self, the
keeping them short
Shavasana
makes it
skipper,
easier for me
that when I
too.
was an adult,
I
I
also have
would
different systems
basically
and routines
teach
in
things
place
like
for
yoga
me
nidra
to know
and
exactly what
long
I
guided
need to do when it
meditations
comes
that
to an
are
episode.
anywhere from
So I'm
10
going to
minutes to
write my
basically
ideas
75
down.
minute
I'm going to
Shavasana.
record the
I'm more than happy
episode.
to
And I
leave
sort of have
you.
like this
But
checklist
I
for
really
me
started with
of what
just
I need
the
to do for each
physical,
episode. So
and I
I'm not
really
sitting there
enjoyed what
thinking each
yoga
time I'm
did
going to
for my
record
body in terms of
or I'm coming back
mobility,
to edit, like,
for
where am I in this? I
recovery.
have it all written
And
down.
then
So I
as
have
I
that
got a little bit
system in
older, when I
place.
was
So I'm
16,
not
my mom was
wasting
diagnosed with
time.
stage
And I
3
think
breast
anything in
cancer,
business,
and I was her primary
I wanted
caregiver
this
at that
podcast
time.
to work for
And I
me.
really started
And so
to
I
have
learned
my
how to
eyes
do it
open to some of the
correctly. And
softer
this is
sides
what
of
I'm focusing
yoga, the
on. So
gentler
I'm not wasting
sides,
my time
some
on
more
other things in my
restorative
business
yoga, and then
that weren't
also, I didn't
really
know it
getting
at
me
the
much
time, but
traction.
different
Yeah,
kind of
it sounds like
mindfulness and
you
meditation
have really found a
techniques.
way of
And
making
I
things really
just found that it
efficient. And I can honestly
really
say, having worked
helped
with you in the
both my
past,
mom,
I've
but
seen
also
that
helped me
in
during
these
like
like processes that you
such a
speak about.
challenging time.
And I
And
also
that's
love
what
the idea of
really
these
kind of
short
introduced
episodes
me
because I
to
suppose not
some of
only
the
they're easier to
softer
create,
sides
but
of
that
yoga
also
that I've
gives
grown
more
to love
content
so
for your
much.
channel, and more content
And I
obviously
didn't really
gets
do
you like
anything
picked
with
up
it
more.
until
So that's
I
super smart as
graduated
well.
Yeah. So I
college
actually
and
release
didn't know what I
2
wanted to do with
episodes
my
a week.
life.
In the
So I did what
summer, I
many
went down
did,
to
which was
1,
take a yoga
but I'm
teacher
able to
training.
release 2 episodes a
And
week
then I
because
was
they are
technically a yoga
shorter.
teacher,
And
even though I
also,
was still working
I
in
thought, man, how am I going to think
management.
of so
And
many like topics to
it
do
wasn't
episodes
until
on when I
I
first started
moved
my
for love
podcast?
with my
But
husband to
they
live
all
on a
come. You
bar
just think of
one
more things
Walmart
that people are
town
asking or
in
talking about, or
rural
as I'm coaching
Midwest
clients, like
America,
topic ideas
that I
come up
thought, you
pretty
know what? I
easy.
have no
Yeah,
friends here.
it's
You're
almost
in
like you get
school all the
in this
time. He was there for
creative
medical
trance, I
school.
find, when you start thinking about
And I
one
had to
that
leave my
spreads to
job. I got
another and
employed.
another, and it's like this infectious
Why
like thought
not
process.
try to
Yeah.
turn
I know
what
that
I
you
love, my
have
passion, yoga,
like
and
recently launched this
ultimately
like in
mindfulness
March. So the
into
podcast is
my
still fairly
job
young,
as
and I want to
well.
get into
I
what
am
this like
so glad you did.
almost first
And
year
I
has
was
looked like.
waiting
But before that,
to tell you
you said
this.
something that
One
interested me. You
occasion on
did
my recent
podcast
trip home
guesting
back to the
before you
UK,
created the podcast. Is
I
that
had
correct?
horrible jet lag.
Yeah,
And one
almost
thing
like
about me is
building
I
up
really
my
struggle to
muscle
sleep.
of
And the
speaking
issue that I
because I
have
really
is when I
wasn't
can't sleep, I get
that
really anxious
confident
about
in
the fact that I
speaking. So
can't
I
sleep,
actually
and it just
started with some
exacerbates
Facebook
problems.
lives
And I
and
fall into this
Instagram
terrible
lives,
cycle. And
just
there was
thinking
on
of
one
different
occasion,
topics I
I think
could
it's like one of my first flights
talk
back in
about
the
that my
UK, when
audience would be
it was
interested in,
like
almost
4
giving
a.m. I
myself a
was
little
wide awake
outline
and I
because it
was
was
just
almost like I
stressing,
didn't know
and
how
I
to
just was
formulate
so
all this
stressed that I'd like
information in my
sleep
head
through
that
the
I
whole of
have.
tomorrow
And
and
then
just like
from
not
that,
be able to break
I
this
went to
cycle.
do
And I
guesting
actually
on
remember
other
pulling out
people's
my
podcasts and
phone,
really
I put
just
my headphones in, and
continuing
I
to build
listened
up
to
that
your
confidence. And
podcast,
then it's
Mindful in Minutes,
finally like,
and literally
hey,
within
I
20
think I can
minutes,
do this.
I
I
just
can
felt
start my
this
own
huge
podcast.
change
And so
within my
that's sort of
body.
how it
I just
began.
felt
I
so
gotta say, it's
relaxed, and I think within
pretty
30 minutes
confident
I
in
was
the sense
asleep.
that
So
Facebook Lives
I'm
and
really
Instagram Lives,
happy to be
was
have
there an
you on here
element of
and talk about your
I
podcast
don't know,
because it
adrenaline or
has
fear?
genuinely
Because
helped me, and
my
there is
thought process
absolutely
would
no
be that it
doubt,
might be
given
easier to guest
the
on other
huge amount of
people's
people that
podcasts
listen to it
because
and
they
leave
can
reviews,
at
that
least be
you are
edited,
doing
whereas you're going
fantastic
in
things with.
live.
Oh, I
What was
appreciate
the
that so
mental
much. And
thought process
that's
like going
so
into those like
special and
Facebook
meaningful for me
Lives
to
and
hear,
Instagram lives for you?
Yeah, in one sense, it can be a little bit more pressure because you are live. Also in the Facebook, Instagram live, I also did episodes or lives with other people too. So we might have had an outline to follow. In one sense, I think when you are podcasting for someone else, there's also some pressure there too that you don't want to do a bad job and do that too. But I think it's, really finding a few topics that you're passionate about. If you're not confident speaking, give yourself an outline, because the more you keep speaking, whether it's perfect or not, the more you're going to get better at it. And then, you can listen to different things, how to speak well. Like I always have to think about how can I incorporate stories? Like that's not natural to me, but I love hearing stories when other people speak. And I know that helps to explain concepts better. So you just improve your speaking as you go.
Yeah, it's like anything. The more you practice, the better you get at it, and it
be nerve-wracking
how many
at
pairs
the
of
start
ears
anyway, but certainly I
are
think that's
listening to
solid
the
advice. And
meditations, but it's
Facebook
always
Lives,
really special
Instagram
to
Lives, or
hear
guesting
like
on other podcasts is a
a story about
great
it
way
because
to start
there's, I
before
think sometimes a
making
bit
your
of a
own. And obviously you did launch
disconnect
your own. It
creating the
came out in March
podcast and then
2023.
the kind of
And I'd be curious to know
almost
if
like
you could
close
go back to that
relationship
time,
that
if
you
you
can
could go back
feel
to before
with a
you started this.
podcaster
What
as a
advice would you
listener
share with
because
your
it's
former
such
self?
like an
Yeah, I'm
intimate
super
experience.
excited. So
Yeah,
a
definitely.
little,
That
I
makes
just
absolute
looked at
sense.
my
And
analytics before we
clearly it's
hopped
had a huge
on,
impact.
and I'm
curious
at
to know, like, how did this first start? Like,
87,000
when did you
downloads,
first
and within a
decide you
month I
wanted to
should be
start
hitting
Mindful in
like
Minutes?
100,000,
So
and
I
that
started
just like
Mindful in Minutes
seems crazy
about
to me
6
because
years
I
ago, which I think is like
never thought it
geriatric for
would
podcasting. Like
grow
I think my
that
podcast at this
much.
point is like a
So if
grandparent
I could go
in terms of
back
like the
and
life
tell
cycle.
myself
As I
something,
mentioned, when I
I
moved
think it would
to
be
this
just
small
to,
town in Missouri,
I
and
think
that's
there's
where I
just more
started
like
my business, Yoga for
anxiety
You,
or
and it started with
anxiousness or
one
worry
class
starting if it's going to work
on
out.
Friday nights at my
But I was
husband's
listening to
school.
another coach talk,
And
and
it
she said,
eventually
you're
like
going to
began to
make
grow and it was
impact
growing, it
before
evolved.
you make income,
And
because
I ended up
obviously
opening a
most of us
studio
want to
there. And we knew we
monetize
were always
our
going to be in this
podcast,
town just for
but
a few
also
years
knowing
until a
that I am
different
making an
kind of portion
impact
of
on
schooling.
people. And
But when I
on my
ended up
podcast, I
leaving
talk
and
about telling people to
selling
come
my
to my Facebook
studio,
group. So I message with
I at
some of
that
these
point had
people.
kind
And
of,
so
I
even
don't know,
if
one
they're
of my
not
kind of
working
like
with me, they're
signatures, I
like,
guess,
oh,
were
that tip
some of
really
my
helped.
guided
And I'm hearing this
meditations or
impact
incorporating some guided
that I'm
meditation
making on people. So
into
also just
Shavasana.
keeping like this
And
broader
when I sold the
picture of
studio
what you want
and
to
I
do,
moved
what
to a
you want to
different part of
share,
the
why you're
US,
passionate
I
about
wanted
it.
to
So
find a way to still
yes,
be able
to
to
hopefully
share
make
some of
some
these
money,
practices with my
but
students,
also
even though we
where
were
is
far
that
apart.
impact
And
that you want to
I
grow
listened to
and helping
podcasts at
and
the time,
serving
and I thought
people
this
along the way.
might be exactly what
Yeah,
I
that's
need.
some
Like it's
solid
an
advice. I
audio
think
medium.
making
You know,
your
I can
content
just
value
put them
driven
up there
and
for
focusing
free.
on
People will
giving
be able
value
to hit
before you look
play. And
on
it's so
getting
funny
it
because the
back,
hardest
that's
part, well,
some
there are
smart
two hard parts
advice.
about
And
podcasting 6 years
I know
ago.
you're very like
One of the hardest
methodical
parts was just getting
in your
people to learn
processes and
like
how you
what a
approach stuff.
podcast
So I'd be
was
curious to
and
know,
how to
like,
listen
what
to
are
it.
some of the most successful
And
steps
the
you've taken
second
to promote
was some
healthy
of the
beyond 40?
logistics used to be so
Yeah,
much
so one
harder
thing
because
I did that I haven't
podcasting was
mentioned was I
so
actually took a
pretty
podcast
small and
course
like pretty niche.
before
And
I
so
launched my
I remember it took me
podcast
like 3 days just to
because
get
I
my
wanted
podcast like
to
up on
launch it
Apple
well. I really
Podcasts
wanted
because it
this
used to have to go
to
through this whole like
be the
approval
way
system. And
to
it just
promote
looked
my
really different
business
than
because
it
I
did
had
today
been
where,
on
you know, you
Facebook, been
could
on
probably get a
Instagram, I'm
podcast
still there,
technically
but
up
it
and running
just
in like a
seems
day if you
like
wanted to.
hard. Like you're just
But I just
dragging
thought, how
yourself
am I
through the
gonna,
mud, and I
you
still
know,
use it, but I
record some of
wanted
these
something
meditations
that
and
I
put them
enjoyed
online
more.
so my
So
students can keep
teaching
listening
and
to them? And
sharing
I
what I
thought,
know,
let's put
inspiring
it up as a
others,
podcast.
having this
But as you
podcast
know, when something's out
is
on the
it
internet,
feels
it's
really
out
good to
there.
me.
Yeah.
So some of the
And so it
things
just
that I
started
do
as
and
a
that I
way
learned
for
in
my
that
students to
course
just be
is
able to
I'm
hit
using
play instead of
SEO
some of these
everywhere. So from
practices.
my title, keywords in
But
their descriptions,
it
when I
just,
go to
it's
do an
continued to
episode, I'm
grow
using
since then.
SEO. So
That's
my
fantastic. And
podcast
if I
grew
understand correctly,
more
you said you started your
from the
podcast
podcast
in
apps
October
from
2017,
using
right?
SEO than
That's
what
right.
my audience
And what
was
did that
at that
first year look
time.
like? So
So
from
my
October
social media
2017
audience
to
is still pretty
2018,
small. So these
how did the
people
podcast
that are
evolve and
coming
how
to
did
my
you
podcast
evolve
are
with it in
mostly
that
finding
first
me
year?
through the podcast apps
It was
from
such a
SEO.
steep
And
learning
also I guest
curve.
on other
Like
podcasts. So some
it
people might trickle
was
in there
just, I think
too
of that like
when I
first
mention
year,
it.
and there was so much
So I'm
trial and
always sort of
error.
taking that
And again,
time
there weren't a lot of
for like the
resources out
titles
there. Like
of
I
each
remember
episode
really
that I'm
having
writing. Like
to
I usually
dig
try
and
not
kind of figure
to
out like
waste too
how
much time,
do I
but
make
the
a
titles of my
podcast? Like how do I
episodes,
get
I
it
will definitely slow
out into
down.
the
Like,
world?
what are
How
some
like
keywords
the
I need here?
logistics of
What's
it.
going to
I
be like
remember
clickable or
it being really
intriguing
challenging,
that
and it
someone
was
is
like
going to want to
each
click on? But obviously,
month
like still
I there
true
would
to
be
the episode. We
something
don't want something like
different or
spammy
new,
or
or I
false.
would, you know,
And
have to
also,
look into different like
really just
audio
sort of checking in
options. And I
with
just
people
remember it
what my
being
analytics
this
are showing,
really
like what episodes are
just
doing
steep
well,
learning curve,
and
which isn't a
trying to
bad
do more
thing, but it
episodes
was like this
around those
brand new
ideas have
challenge
helped
that
too.
I had
That's
never
cool.
really
I think
tried to
one
do
of the
before,
things that's
and
so
there
often
weren't
overlooked when it comes
a
to
lot of
podcasting
resources
is when
out
we
there.
think
So
of
it really
search
felt
engines
like
and
kind of this like
SEO,
diving into
most
the
people revert
unknown.
back to
And I
Google,
had this
or
like
I suppose
dream of
most
like,
people
well, wouldn't
think
it
of
be
Google
really cool
primarily
if like,
when it comes to
you
this.
know,
But obviously, like
people
you mentioned,
discovered
podcast platform
this
apps,
podcast? Like it
Spotify,
wasn't just people that
Apple
were already
Podcasts,
familiar with
even
my teaching
YouTube
because they were
are
direct
important
students of mine.
places
Like,
where
wouldn't
you
it
can
be
be
cool if
discovered. Um,
other people
and you're
kind of
really
stumbled
creating that like
across
evergreen
this? And
content
so
that's
I
going to be
kind of felt
found
like I
for
just blindly
potentially
went
years to
into
come.
it. I've
If
always
you
been the
do
kind of person that
make the right decisions,
I
like you
think this
mentioned
is
there.
useful to me, where
And
I'm
I
like,
do want to
just
know,
the
you
right
mentioned
amount
about
of
this
like
podcast
reckless,
course. If
where
someone
I'm
is
like,
listening
oh,
to
I
this
don't
and they're
know, why don't
thinking,
we
you
just
know
give
what,
this a
I probably
try?
do
Or
need to
like,
do a
let's
podcast
just, I think
course
it's the impulsive
before I
part of my
start my
ADHD
podcast,
where I'm
how did
like,
you
you
make the
know,
decision? Like,
what might
this is the
work
one for
for
me. What
these
would you tell
meditations
them
I want
to
to
look
share?
out for?
Let's just start a
Yeah, so I
podcast.
wanted
And then
someone
I'll
who
just decide to start a
podcast
podcast
was
and kind of
actually
figure it out along
doing
the way.
well.
But I think the first year in
and
particular,
someone that I
there was
just
just
really
so
felt
much
connected
growth. I
with, that she was
didn't
going to
do
provide
episodes weekly. I
the
would take like 2
information.
big kind of like
You
seasonal
know,
breaks.
they always say share
And it was
client
really
results and
just
things
kind
like
of
that.
like
And I like
trial
seeing
and
that,
error,
but I
figure it out
really
as I
like,
go.
it's
And with
probably
those
my
seasonal
brain. I want to
breaks,
see
what
like
did it look
what's
like? How
inside the
would you
course.
structure
Like
it during that
what's
time?
actually
If I
here,
remember
because I can use
correctly,
that.
for the
Like,
first, I
is
think,
this going to provide me
2
with the
to
information I
3
need
years of the
to really make this
podcast,
successful?
it's funny because actually
So the
everything
person I
changed right
took the
around
course
COVID, which we
through,
can
she
circle
had
back to
like,
that.
an
But
hour
that's when
video
like the
that was
podcast
free
really
that
kind of
really
popped
gave you
off,
a
and like
taste
I
of
had to start
how
taking
she
it, I
teaches,
say
and she has her
seriously,
own
like
podcast. So I
I
listened
had to
on
get a little bit
there,
more
and I
professional with
really
it because
sat
more and
on
more
it for
people
a little
started
bit
listening.
because it's a bit of an
But I
investment.
believe I used to take like a big
But I
break around
felt
the
pretty good
holidays.
going into
So
it, and
maybe like
I'm super happy with her
6-ish weeks,
course,
and
and
then
she
I would
still
do that
has a
again like in the
Facebook
summer.
community for those who have bought her
And
course.
if I were to
So
ever go
I'm
back
able
to
to
that, those
ask
would still be the
questions in
2 times a
there
year
and
I
still
would take
have
a
a
break
little bit of
because
ongoing support, which
naturally
I
I have
think is
found
helpful too.
listenership is
Well, it
down in
seems like
general because
it's
those are 2
worked well
times
for you.
people are out of
And
their
I also want to
routines.
ask you about your
And
podcast guesting. Like,
podcast
is that
listening is
something
such
you
like a
do
ritual for
personally? Do you
people.
send the
And
pitches
so
yourself?
I
How do you
think that
get
I just felt
yourself
like,
booked
well,
on these
everyone's kind
shows?
of checked
Yeah,
out a little
that it's a
bit
lot of work.
during
I'm
these
sure
2
you
times of
know
the
Yeah,
that.
you're
year.
telling me.
So I'll
Yeah.
just take a
And
little
I
break
think
from
also
podcasting
now
too.
I'm
And it wasn't a
getting
big part
at
of my
the
business at
point
that time.
where,
So I think I
I'll
used to
use some
take
Facebook groups
maybe
that where
6-ish
people
weeks.
post like looking for a guest, that kind of thing.
Okay, cool.
And
And do you
almost
remember
at the point
what
where
the listeners were like
with
in
my
those
time that
early
I need to
years
be a
and how
little
that
more
kind of like,
strategic
what was a
about
ballpark
choosing
figure as like
podcasts
things
that I
progressed?
guest on,
Oh, I don't even
because
have to tell you
starting this
my
podcast and
ballpark
knowing
figure,
like
Sam. This
how
is
some
my
other
one
people's
piece.
podcasts
I was
go. I
actually
mean,
just talking
anyone
with
can start a
someone
podcast, and if
earlier
you're not
today.
really
But anyone
starting
starting
it
a
strategically,
podcast or
using SEO,
anyone
using these other
starting
things,
anything,
like
I highly
that
recommend
episode may
starting a
not get
spreadsheet
very
in which you
many
check
downloads or
for
much reach.
metrics
So I
or
want
like
to
you
be a
track
little
your
more strategic,
metrics
making sure
for
I'm
whatever
spending
it
my
is that
time
you're
on
focusing on
at least
growing every
podcasts that
single
have
week.
some
I started
traction.
this in
And
2018,
that
so I
really
can
just
tell
comes
you
down
that all the
from,
way back
that time
in
standpoint
early
that I
2018,
want to work on my
my
business,
podcast
because then I
was
want to
maybe
have
getting
time
like
outside of my business for my
3,000
family and to
downloads a
take care
week.
of me and
I can
all
tell
that
you
other stuff.
exactly March of
Yeah,
2018 when I
definitely. I
started this, it
mean,
had
it's important to be
3,055
strategic with your
downloads a
time. And
week.
I mean,
That's awesome.
doing your own
I
podcast
love
alone
spreadsheets, so
takes
I'm
up so
definitely be
much more time
implementing
than
that.
one might
And the
consider,
reason that I recommend
just
people
as a
do this
listener.
is
And then
because
pitching on top
you
of that,
like it feels
it's
like you're hardly turning
yeah,
the
it's
dial
going to make you
sometimes.
very
Sometimes
time
there'll be a big
constricted. But
thing where
I'm
it's like,
curious, you
wow, there's a
also
huge
previously
jump this
mentioned
week
like
because
find
of
a few
A, B, or
topics
C.
that you can
But
do and speak to
for
those.
me, it's
When
really
you
useful,
are
like on the
reaching out to
days,
these
even now,
podcasts and
and
you're
I
pitching
love my
yourself,
podcast
how
so
did
much.
you
I love my
decide on
community
these
so
topics,
much.
and what
But
kind
there's
of
just some days
influenced
where you're just
the
like, God,
decision making to go ahead and pitch these shows
why
with
did
these
I
topics?
choose this
Yeah.
path?
So
Or,
I like to find
this thing has popped up or whatever.
podcasts.
Like some days are, all days
So
are good, but some
obviously
are
mine is
better.
about health and
And I
fitness. I
can
do
go
personal
back to like
training,
this
health
data in
coaching.
a way, or just when you
So
feel like
sometimes I
everything you're
will look
doing
for
isn't turning the
people in
dial.
that
And I can
space,
look
but
at like
also for
the
me, like
difference
finding
between a
podcasts
year or
where
2 years or
their
3
audience
or
will
4
also
years.
relate, but
And
maybe
you
it's not
look
what they
at,
do.
even if it
So it
doesn't
might
feel
be
like
some
in the
type of
moment you're
mom
turning the dial
podcast
or,
or someone who
growing your
talks more
community.
about
But
the
then when you look
kitchen,
back over
or
time, it's so
just a little, you can
special and
sort of think
humbling to
outside the
see
box
like
too.
that
And
long-term
then
growth instead of the
really, I like
short-term
to
growth.
scan their recent
And I
episodes
find
and
that
see
to
like what's
be
missing that
so
I could
good to
provide
look at
value
on the
to. So
days
I
that like
think that
nothing's
is
great or
helpful.
the days that,
And just
you're just
sharing a
feeling
little bit
tired.
about me.
And so that's why I always
And I'm
recommend
not always
like,
great about this,
even
but
if,
if they don't
you're
answer,
like, I have
trying
20
to
listeners. That's amazing.
follow up
Every week,
to
just
or
go and look
connect
at your
on a different
metrics, put
platform.
in
Like if it was
what that
Instagram, I
number
connected, I
is.
might
And
email
if
them
you
or
do that every
something.
week, like a year from now,
Yeah,
look
well, I can
back,
say as a podcast booking
and it's
expert
really
myself, you're
motivating.
doing
And I
all the
think it's
right
also really
things.
like validating
And
the growth over time.
I want to know, do
That sounds
you
like it would,
offer guest swaps,
yeah,
or do
would
you ever
really
get
help definitely
responses where
during
people
those
say,
lower
I'd love
periods.
to have
And
you
you
on,
did
would you be
mention something that was
interested in
quite
doing
interesting
a
to me.
guest
You
swap, and
mentioned
how
about
do you
how
approach that?
during
Yeah,
COVID
I
things
have
changed,
done.
and
I
you said
recently
that
just did
more
one
people are
guest
listening,
swap,
and of
and
course for you
like
to be like
more
her
professional?
podcast is
What did,
also
being more
doing pretty
professional
well
entail
too.
for you? What did
So
that mean?
yeah, we did
So
that.
being more
She's also
professional
into health,
entailed
and it
publishing
felt really
every
good. We
week.
talked
So I
about our
only know
topics,
this
and
again
that was
because of one
through
of my
the
one of the
podcast course that
many
I took, that
handy
Facebook
dandy
Facebook group that
spreadsheets.
they have.
Because
There was
in
like a
this
post about
spreadsheet where I
doing
track my
swaps.
podcast downloads and things
So
like
that
that,
was
I have
how I found that, but I
a little
typically
column where I
don't go
can make
look
any
for it,
notes
but
of what may
depending
have
on the person,
impacted
if it's
membership
offered,
growth
if
in
it
an
feels like
episode,
a
something I
good
can make note of it.
even
And
exchange and
there's
valuable
2
to
weeks
my
here in my
audience,
spreadsheet,
then I'll
and
do
in the
that.
little note section,
Yeah,
it just
because
says
that's something
COVID,
that I've
and the week
noticed
after that, it
working
just
with
says
my
COVID.
clients. Like if they have
That's
a
all it
podcast
says. And
and it's
from
sizable, then
March
not all the
6th
time,
to
but
13th,
occasionally they'll come
I
back and
was
be like,
getting
"Oh,
maybe
they're just open to podcast swaps." So
25,000
it is
downloads a
interesting
week.
to see
And
how you
then
personally handle that.
March
And I do
13th
kind
to
of want to
March
know, in the
20th,
vein
which
of
is when
having people on your show,
lockdown
you mentioned
orders,
that
at
you
least in the
focus a lot on solo
US, were put into
episodes,
place,
but I know in the
it
past you
jumped from
have had
like
guests on. What do you
25,000
look
a week
for
to
when
like
you receive a
100,000
pitch from
a week.
someone wanting to be on
And
Healthy Beyond
for
40?
me, it ended up being a blessing.
Yeah,
but
it
for
was
me,
sort of
something
crazy at
obviously that
first.
was so
I started after
horrible
a
and
little bit
scary.
getting
And
like
at this
emails from
time, I
people
had
like,
was
I want to be on your
about 1
podcast, or I
week
have
before
someone that would
COVID,
be
I
a fit
found
for
out
your
that I was
podcast. And
pregnant
I
with
was
my
like,
first
wow,
child,
like
who we
people
call
are
Pork
reaching out
Chop.
to me. And first
I
I
had
just
just found out that I was pregnant,
ignored
and I was so
them
stressed. And
because I was just doing solo
my business
episodes. But then
model
I'm
at the
like, hey, you
time
know what?
primarily
Like,
relied on
I'll
traveling to
reply
meetings and
because it takes
retreats.
me
And
more
so
time to edit
obviously
it.
we're
Like I
staying
have
at
a $100
home,
editing fee
flights
if
were
you're
not happening,
interested.
and all of
So
that. And
it
we
has
started
also
thinking, like,
become
how
a small
am I
stream,
ever
but
going to
another
survive
little
this?
stream of
And
income for my
it
business
turns out
too.
that there were a lot of
And I
people at
only do
home
that when
thinking the
people
same
reach
thing,
out
like,
to me.
how
I'm
am I
not
ever going to
reaching out
survive
to
this? And there's
people
so much
saying,
stress,
hey,
so
be a
much
guest and
worry,
pay
so much
$100.
anxiety.
Yeah.
But when
That
people
people
reach out to
started
me, I do
looking
that.
for
And so what
simpler
I'm
ways
looking
to
for
kill that
when
anxiety.
someone reaches out to
And
me
it ended
is,
up driving
do
so
they
much
have
organic
something
traffic
that
to my
my audience
podcast
would
that
be
this was really the
interested in?
turning point
And
where I went
something maybe
from,
not
you know, like
exactly what I do,
casual
but complements it
podcaster to
well.
like
So like
podcasting is what
me
I
and
do.
you met
And
through someone
so,
who is on my
you know, it's
podcast,
interesting
and
how
she was
sometimes
into
some of
fascia.
the
So
Mhm.
that is a
biggest changes
tissue
or
in our
shifts or even
body.
blessings in life
And I
come
know a little
from
bit about
really
it, but it's not my
unexpected
expertise.
and
So
tough
I
and
thought that
dark
would be really
things.
fun to
And
be
so
able
for
to
me, to
share
answer your
that
question
with my
about being
audience in
professional,
what she
what
does.
that
So
meant
can they
was
provide value in some
trying to treat
way?
my podcast
And
a
also,
little
does
bit
this
more
person like know
like a
really
business,
well
at
what
least
they're
on the back
talking
end. So
about?
I've never really
So I'm
wanted the
gonna
actual
probably
like
check out
listener
their
experience
website
to
or
be
social
different,
media,
but that meant like
Mhm.
being a little
and
bit
make
more
sure
organized,
that
like
they're a
hosting a
good fit. And
meditation
then we
every
do just a
week,
quick
starting a
interview
different
to make
spreadsheet
sure
where I
it's a
kept
click.
track of
Mhm.
topics. So I
You
had
mentioned that
like a
you
good
obviously
variety
charge
of
a
different
$100
topics
fee for the
on
editing, and that helps,
meditations.
like, obviously
You know,
with the show
starting
moving
looking at
forward. Do
getting
you ever get a
advertisers and
response from
things
people
like
where
that,
they
like
say
how
no, or
if
they
the
maybe
thing that
reach
people
out
are
and
looking
then
for right now is
they
my
decline
podcast,
being on the show? Like
and the
how
thing
does
that
that
I
ever
can do,
impact the
basically
dynamics between
having
you and the people
a
that initially
pandemic
reach out?
pregnancy
Yeah,
from my
I've had a
current
few people
apartment
like, oh,
is podcast.
like, no,
How can
like,
I
and they
make
almost sort
this
of like
work and
try to
turn it a
pitch
little bit
again, like
more
this
into a
person can
business
provide really
on the
good
back
value.
end? So that's
And I mean, I
what
just
I
don't
think of in
respond
terms
because
of
to
like
me, it's like
being
I'm
professional
not
is
really searching
just
for
taking it a little
guests.
bit more
So
seriously
it's not
and
like
being
hard
like,
feelings on my
I don't know,
part.
what can
So yeah,
podcasting
to
do
me,
for me?
It
it
sounds super
doesn't bother me.
professional. Now, I really wanted to ask
I'm
because
curious to know, out of all
obviously,
these
as
things
a
you've tried, you obviously
podcast
mentioned
booking
there about
specialist
like
myself, we
hosting
do see that come
meditations
up.
each week. I'm
And
guessing
I
that's
have
like
to
some
say,
sort
I
of
can pretty
live
easily
meditation
tell when
outside of the podcast, right?
a show is
So
way
you know, I
overcharging
dabbled
their
in a lot of
guests and like
things,
they're
but
using
the
that as
thing
the
that's
primary
always
way
just
just
worked
to
is
make money. And
just
I'd
what you
never got
still
that sensation
hear,
with you. I loved
mindful
working
in
with you.
minutes.
Mhm.
And I have to
I
say
have
that
a
you're
secondary
one of the good
podcast called
ones.
Meditation
But it is
Mama, which
interesting
is
because I do
smaller,
have
but
other
it's more
clients that I've
niche.
worked with, and
This is
out
guided
of matter of
meditations for
principle,
fertility,
they'll
prenatal,
just
and
say like
postnatal.
no
So like a
to
really
all kind
specific
of
window
like
in someone's life.
offers to be on a show
But
where
the
you have
thing
to
that's
pay
always worked,
because they have
I did
this
dabble in some other things, some live
or in
events,
some
things like
cases
that.
I've heard where
But
there's
just
that feel like that
making
it's
a
an equal
meditation,
exchange
like
of
creating a
value, and they're like
recording
saying, oh, I'm
and
going to be on the
releasing it
show, so I'm going
on
to be giving
Sundays
value. And I
just
suppose
seemed
it's
to be the
that
thing that
sensation of
worked and
reciprocity, like
continues to
in
work. And
their
like I said,
mind they
I've
feel like
always
what they're
tried my
adding
best to
doesn't
keep the listener
warrant
experience the
a
same
payment.
or
But
better
I can
as I
completely
continue to do
understand from your
this, and that
perspective,
even if
like
I'm getting
obviously
a
that's
little
why I
bit,
mentioned
tighter and
you're
more
one of the good ones.
professional on like
Yeah,
the
it definitely
backside of
takes more
podcasting,
time for
but that
me to
doesn't
like set
change
up the interview,
the
edit the
listener's
episode,
experience at
and
all.
do all of that.
Okay.
So,
I obviously
making
know from
sure
working with
I'm
you that
sort of
you've
getting
shared your message
reimbursed
by
for my time a
being a
little bit.
guest
But I
on
also
other
think I
shows.
have
What do you feel are
people have
like some of
posted
the
in the
most
past
successful
before,
steps
like,
you've
be a
taken to
guest on
help
my
promote
podcast. And there's been a
mindful
couple
minutes?
people, I'm like, sure.
Well,
And then we like
not
do a
to give
pre-interview,
you a plug
and then they're
Sam, but
like, hey, there's a fee
but
to
like
be on my
that definitely
podcast.
helped.
What?
And
Like
that
you helped
does
so much, like
not
helping
feel
me kind
good.
of
Yeah, that doesn't sit well
facilitate
with
the
me either.
conversation with
Yeah.
I've had
other
that before.
podcasts, which
I
is
had that
always a little
one.
bit
I had one
trickier
previously
previously where,
since my show
okay,
is
so this
guided
show said that
meditations
they could
or
have someone on,
specifically like
and it wasn't a
meditation
huge show. I mean,
teachings,
they've
like on a
got some good
particular
numbers on
style, or
YouTube and
like I
Instagram,
do
but
these
it's not a huge
3-part
show. And they said
episodes where maybe
it's
I'll
five
talk
hundred
about like
dollars
here's the
to be on,
101
and
of
that
like
covers
walking
half
meditation.
the cost of the production
I
of the
don't
episode. And
have
I was like,
guests or
half
do
the
interviews
I was
on
like,
my
how
show,
much?
and
You're
sometimes
just
that makes it a little bit
recording the
trickier
episode, and
because
I don't even know if they did a
podcasters will
video. I
often
think
like
maybe they
swap
did,
interviews
but
and
it didn't look
things,
high budget.
and I
And I
didn't
was like,
really have
why
that
is
to bring to
it
the
costing you
table.
$1,000 an episode?
So
And they're like,
getting
okay,
on
you got
other
us. It's
shows
actually
was really
60 to
great,
70%
especially
of the cost
because
of the show.
once someone's,
And even then, I
you
was
know,
like,
that I
well,
think you're
first
the
of
one
all,
that
you
told me
lied to
the
me.
stat
And
Sam, what's a
second of
stat if
all,
someone
like,
listens to like
how
one
is it costing
podcast,
this
listens to
much?
like
So
nine a
like, I
week
got
or
really bad
something?
vibes
Yeah,
from them.
they're
Yeah.
usually like
And
hardcore
it's in those
podcast
cases where I'm like,
listeners. Yeah.
this doesn't sit well with me.
And
And
that
then
they
from then
usually
onwards,
have
I'll
their
know
like
I'm not going to
strong
pitch or interact with this show
rotation
Mhm.
of
because
podcasts
you just
and
get
like,
that gut
they listen
feeling.
to this
Yeah.
and this
So
and
yeah,
that.
I think it
So
really
it's always
depends on
great to get into other
your own
podcast
instinct and
listeners'
your own
ears, because if
analysis,
they're
and it's a
already
case by case
listening
basis.
to someone
On the
else's
topic of
podcast,
monetization,
they're
though, what are
already
your main focuses
consuming
for like
podcasts, and that's
monetizing a
often one of the
podcast
hardest
or earning
parts,
revenue
is
from
turning
Healthy
a
Beyond 40?
non-podcast listener into
Yeah,
a podcast
absolutely.
listener.
So the first
So
way
that was
I
really
did
helpful,
is,
but
and
the
I
thing
think
that I
it's
have
helpful
always
to
felt
start this as soon
is
as
like
you're launching
the
your
most
podcast, is
helpful
I
thing
started
ever
sharing
is
my
educating your
Facebook group to get
audience
people
on the power that
into
they
a free
have to
space,
help
and
you
then also
organically
to set
grow.
up like a free
Mhm.
So
health
if you think
coaching call with
about
me. So
how,
I was
you
able
know,
to
anyone
get
listening,
new
how
clients
you
from the
stumble across a new
podcast.
podcast, it's usually because
The
someone
other thing that
recommended
I
it
have
to you,
also done
or you
is
saw
there
it
is
somewhere.
a
Like,
green juice
people don't
that I
often
really
just like go
like
to
and
the
I use
chart to
myself.
like
So they had an
even
affiliate
necessarily the
program.
search
So
bar
I
and like
signed up
just
with that.
start searching
And that
things
was
and
interesting because I
stumble across
remember
it. They don't
talking about
consume
it
it
on
like
the
you do, like
podcast for
when you're
like
sitting
a
on your
month or
couch
two
on the
and telling
weekend
my
being like,
husband,
what do I
like,
want to watch on
no
Netflix today? And
one,
they like
like, I don't,
browse.
no one's
Mhm.
People
bought
don't
it
do that for
yet. Like, I
podcasts.
don't
It's
know if it's
usually word
working.
of
And then all
mouth.
of a
And
sudden,
so
like,
I've
there
always
was
tried my
some more.
best
Then the
to
next month it
educate
doubled
my
and
audience
it
and like
started
let
to
them
grow
know
more.
how
So
grateful
I
I
also
am every
found
time they
another
leave a
company,
review, because
again,
that,
that
you
I
know, helps to
use.
boost the algorithm, or
Their omega
share
oil, and
meditation
they
that they
do
love
test-based nutrition.
on
So
Instagram
partnering with a
stories or
company that
something
I
like that, or
really
just even
like,
tell a
and then
friend
just sharing
who's
about
like, oh,
that
I'm not
has been
sleeping at
another
night,
way
and
to
then be
sort of
like, oh,
add
well, you know, when I can't sleep,
another
I
stream of
listen to this
income. And I
podcast
can
and they
see
send me the
that
episode,
continuing
because really you grow
to
at the
pay
rate
off
of
more
like
long term too, because I
your
think
listeners
people
sharing
need to
it.
hear
So it's
that
very much a word of
quite a
mouth
bit
thing. And
before
I
they
just
start to look
try
at
to
it.
tell my listeners, like,
Yeah,
it would
I'm
mean so
interested to
much to
know
me if
when
you
you
could
mentioned
share
there
this with
about
one person.
partnering with,
And it
I
would.
think
I
that
mean all of
omega
this
3 company,
because
was it? Did they
Mhm.
especially when
reach
it
out
comes to
to
things
you
like
or did
guiding
you reach out to
meditations, it's
them?
like if you
No,
know
so I
someone
reached out to them. So
and you
one
think
of
of
my
them and they're
friends
like, oh,
actually
so and
introduced
so
me
would
to
love
the
this
company,
meditation, or
and I
so and so
had,
needs this
so they
meditation.
have like
Mm.
at
Like,
home
it would be
testing you can
so
do of
helpful for
your,
me, and
the
also so
omegas in
kind
your
of you
blood.
to
And I
then
did
just like
mine, and
share
mine
it with that
was
person,
terrible,
because I'm
more
just
because
trying
I
to get
don't
these
eat
practices
fish,
to
Mhm.
people who want
or
to
take
need
fish
them.
oil.
Yeah,
So then
definitely.
I started
And
using their
one thing
product, and I
I
did
did
that
want
for
to
about 8
add on
months
to is you
before I
mentioned there about
shared
the
it. Because
difficulty of doing
again,
podcast
as we were
spots.
just
There's no
even
doubt that
talking
if you have a
about,
podcast and you
you
got
know,
guests
that
and you want to be on other
$100
people's
guest
shows,
editing fee I had,
it
I
really
think
is
it's really
very
important to
advantageous to be
lead
able to invite them on.
your
But
business
one thing that's
well and
really
in
really
honesty
helped
and
us
truth to
certainly when we were
yourself.
doing
So these
outreach was
products that I'm sharing,
the fact that you were able
I
to
use
offer
them.
Instagram
I
Lives
really
as like
like
a swap
them. My
instead.
family
And
uses
that's
them.
particularly useful,
And then it's
especially
easier
in like your
to
case, because
share
you're
that and
a
to
fairly
feel good
substantial
about it.
following.
You
I
know,
think
I'm
the
not
last
just
time I
sharing
checked, you
that
got
to
like
make money. I'm
21,000
sharing that because I
22,023
believe
or
in
something.
these and it
Yeah,
helps
It was
me.
something
20
like
something like that
Yeah,
on
you can
Instagram.
stand by it.
something
And
like
I really
that.
hate
Yeah.
using
And
this
that's
word
a
now
really
because I feel
strong
like it's
thing
been hijacked.
to
But
be able
when
to
you're
leverage. So
authentic
that
in your
was
business,
really
it really
helpful
shows. And I
for
think that
us.
you can see
And
that kind of
I know that you do
authenticity.
focus
It's
on
important because it's
just
very
these
Yeah.
guided
transparent. You know when
meditations.
people
And
are
one of
being
the things
real
I
or
wanted
not.
to ask you about them is
So yeah,
how
absolutely,
do you
that's a
find the
step that you cannot
creativity to
miss.
come up with new
And I do
meditations
wanna.
for every
I ask this
episode?
question
And
to
what
all
is
my
this
guests. I'm
process
really
like?
curious
Because
to know how they came to
is
this
this something that
decision
they
and why they
teach you? Are
chose it.
you
But
taught
which
like that? I can
platform do you
imagine there
use to
must be a
host
certain
Healthy Beyond
sense of
40?
innate
I
creativity
use
within you
Podbean,
to
and
come up
that
with
is
these.
just
But
because the
is
person
there
I took
such
the
a thing
course
as like
from, that's what she
a
recommended.
guide on guided
I think it
meditations?
was
So
Anchor.
there
Maybe now
is
it's owned
now,
by
because I
Spotify. I
created
mean, I
one,
heard with that
not to
one,
like
like
toot
a
my own
couple
horn,
issues. So
but
I
the
just sort
reason
of
that
like didn't overthink it.
so
I'm like, I'm just
I'll
going to use what
answer your
this
second
person is
question first.
recommending. And it's been
But
fine, but I don't
basically,
have
I
anything else
didn't
to
feel
compare it
like
to.
Same for
no
most
one really
people, I think.
necessarily
I think
taught me
once you
how to
choose
do
a
this.
podcast platform,
And
I've
I
spoken to
know there's a
podcast
lot of
hosts on here and they
people
have switched.
that
where they
absolutely
have been
can
on
do it. It
like
is not
Spotify
as
for
hard as
podcasters. I think
people
that's
think it is.
formerly
And
known
I
as
kind of have
Anchor.
a little
I think
bit of
that's a
like
great
a
place to
formula.
start,
Having doing
certainly.
this for a
But
while.
as
So
you
like
level up,
I do like
I
some
think you
master
do
classes and things like
require a
that
more
for people
professional
who now want
platform.
to learn how
So
to
I'm always
write guided
interested to know like
meditations
where people
because I don't
start,
really
what
feel
experiences
like
they've had, and where they are now.
anyone taught me.
But Podbean
And
is obviously
I
like a
like
well
to, in my
recognized industry
business
leader.
and
So
in my
yeah,
life,
that's cool to know.
sometimes I like to take
And
sort of the
I
long
kind of
route
wanted to know,
so I can
really,
pull
some
out
of my
like the
last
relevant
questions
bits and like
are
package
just
them
about
together
advice
so
in
then someone
general. And
else
I
can
want to
kind of
know, what
take
do you
like the
think it
short route
takes
to get
to create
there.
a
But
successful
I find a
podcast?
lot of
Yeah,
enjoyment
I
in
think
like
to really
the
create
wrong
a
turns and the
successful
deep dives
podcast
and
and
the,
more talking about
wherever
monetizing it here,
learning
because
takes you.
and even
But
if
in
you're
terms
not
of
wanting
like,
to monetize it,
I
if you
really
want
think
to
of
reach
this as
more
like my
people, you have to
my
set it
creative
up
outlet
well.
rather
And
than
I
just like
think
this
SEO,
artist like
that's been
writing these,
huge
I'm not
for
like some
me.
tortured artist
And like I
writing these
said earlier,
meditations.
like looking at
But
your analytics,
I
what
consider
episodes
myself a
are
creative
people
person,
resonating with?
like
What
through
are those sort of
words, but not
keywords that
like
you can pull
a
out
visually
and talk
creative
more
or,
about in
other
different
things. And
ways? And also really just getting that feedback, like the feedback I said about people liking the short episodes. Like that's really good to know, because then I'm going to make sure that I'm really doing that, because I want to keep my audience engaged and listening.
And how do you elicit this feedback? Is it something that you post in your Facebook group, or do you ask people to leave reviews, or is there another method?
Yeah, one of the main ways. So I will chat with people. So on my podcast, I tell them to join my free Facebook group, Healthy Beyond 40. And I message everybody who joins, just like a welcome message. And I say, how did you find me? And so then that sort of opens up the conversation. Obviously, not everybody sees those messages because they can go to I don't know, one of the filters, but the people who do answer, that's how I've been able to get feedback. I've also I send out a weekly email. So every once in a while, someone will respond to the email, or when I'm doing a free call, people give feedback. Even like some of my clients still listen to my podcast. So as I'm like on a coaching call for the week with them, they're like, oh, I really like your episode you did this week. And, they'll tell me what they like about it. So different places I'm getting feedback.
That's awesome. I think, yeah, that's so essential. And I really just have one last question for you. Like, you've spilled so much interesting and useful information in this episode. But if someone was listening and, you know what, for some reason they're busy doing the chores, housework, whatever, and they just take one piece of advice away from this, what would be the one piece of information that you would want them to walk away with about creating and monetizing a podcast?
Yeah, sort of like, when I'm health coaching with people, I'm always talking about simplifying it, narrowing it down to one habit, because I think when things seem too big and too complicated, we don't get started. So it's the same thing in podcasting. How can you simplify? How can you narrow down on what you need to do? So maybe you haven't started your podcast. Like, how can I start figuring out who I want to speak to? How could that podcast title go? Like, how am I going to start connecting with people? So if you can sort of narrow down on what your focus needs to be, and not quite looking at that big picture if you're feeling stuck, and just doing one thing, then doing that next to get yourself ready to launch it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I love the phrase "something isn't nothing," and I know from being on your page before, you take the same approach with exercise, and I think that's really smart. I love fitness myself. It's one of the reasons why our podcast booking agency focuses on health and wellness and fitness, and I think that it's a principle that can definitely be applied to anything in life, really. Obviously, I would highly recommend listeners to go check out Healthy Beyond 40, leave a review, and share it, listen to it, do all those wonderful things. But Michele, if they want to contact you or keep up with you in person, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram under my name, Michele Riechman. Also, you can send me an email at Michele with one L at healthybeyond40.com. And I would love to connect with people. I've had like quite a few friends and different people I've networked like reach out to me because they're starting a podcast and they're like, yours is doing well. So I love encouraging other people who are getting started on their journey too.
Fantastic, excellent. Well, we'll have your contact information in the show notes, but otherwise, best of luck. And I know you just got started more or less, but I can see a very prosperous future for you if you keep doing all the things you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to see what will happen. Podcasting is a long game, so it's just getting started.
Advertisement, which is where you can go through on the back end and mark where you would allow.
Thanks for joining us today. Remember, you can find more helpful resources to grow your business with podcasting on our blog at podwritten.com and on Instagram at podwritten. You can also find a full transcript for this episode on our website, so be sure to visit podwritten.com or follow the links in the episode description. Until next time, stay healthy, happy, and successful.
Which was really kind of nice because having been podcasting for so long, it allows me to keep